absolutely gripping story by Rosie Batty to start off this afternoon. So welcome back, and welcome back to Her Royal Highness, the Crown Princess of Mary. Looking forward to your keynote tomorrow. Thank you for being with us again this afternoon. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I know we've been making kind of jokes about the limited number of men in this room, but I, for one, am a person who likes to look on the positive side of things. So what I would like to do is a round of applause for the men who are here. Because, and this is something I personally feel very strongly about, the men who are here actually understand that violence against women is not a problem for women. It's a problem for each and every one of us. So I just wanted to say that. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, my name is Aldith Hunkar, and I am one of the moderators of this 4-day conference. And we have now landed. Well, let me first ask, how was your morning and how were your parallel sessions? Any good? Excellent, excellent. So by now you know we'll be working with themes, and we have now arrived on the theme of sustainable financing and advocacy. And in this plenary, we will do so with relevant keynotes and, of course, in the panel discussions that will take place here on stage. And then there's the role of governments in the whole story about violence against women. How important is it for governments to define both the scope within which to operate and the policies for implementation? Those two go hand in hand. We will hear from a panel shortly, but firstly we have a keynote from a country that actually has a minister for women, which I think many countries should follow suit. So please give a round of applause for the Minister of Women, because she is with us, and the Minister of Employment from Australia, Michaelia Cash.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness, Crown Princess Mary. Ladies, more ladies, and gentlemen, and I too echo the words of our moderator. To all of the gentlemen here, thank you for your commitment. It's because of men like you that we ultimately will see change in relation to domestic violence. It's just an absolute honour to join you here today and to speak about what the Australian government is doing to counter domestic and family violence. We've just had a very personal insight, and I'm still moved every time I see it, from someone in Australia who is well known to us all, and that is, of course, a survivor and the 2015 Australian of the Year, Rosie Batty. The news clip of Rosie speaking out after the death of her son Luke, I think, is a reminder to each and every one of us of the pervasiveness, not just in Australia, but globally, of violence against women and their children. As Rosie said, family violence happens to everybody. No matter how nice your house is, how intelligent you are, it can happen to anyone and everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Rosie, at the end of that video clip, made a comment. She said, "I hope that I've done something small and that Luke's death was not in vain." Can I assure you, on behalf of the Australian government, but I think on behalf of all Australians, Rosie hasn't just done something small. In the 20 months since Luke passed away, was murdered by his father, in a very public place, I think Rosie has done more to change the face of how in Australia we as a government and as a society address violence against women and their children. Rosie has literally harnessed her inner strength and has now become a beacon of light for all of us. What she has done is she has ensured that as a government and as a society, we now openly talk about the issue of domestic violence. This issue has been discussed around Australia at dinner tables. You now see it on the news at night in your lounge room. It has become something that is quite literally impossible to ignore. There is now in Australia a national understanding And that national understanding is one that living free from violence is everybody's right, but it is also everybody's responsibility to ensure that this occurs. From a policy perspective, the Australian government has a very simple message, both at home to Australians and internationally. We believe that all women and children in Australia have the right to be safe at home, safe on the streets, and safe online. And certainly I've been invited today to talk to you as a policymaker about what the Australian government is doing and successive governments have done to ensure that we are putting in place policies that do reduce violence against women and children. Media now report in Australia that almost 2 women a week are murdered as a result of their gender. 1 in 4 Australian women have experienced violence at the hands of a partner or a former partner. In terms of our policy-responsive governments, historically, it has been extremely fragmented. Often necessarily so, as many of you will be aware, that Australia is a federation of states, and our state governments and our federal government have different responsibilities. What happened though in 2009, only recently, but it was a significant change in the policy landscape. The state, the territory and the federal governments came to an understanding via the Council of Australian Governments, and they made a decisive decision. They were going to intervene in this issue together. So political leaders from across Australia entered into a nationwide commitment to streamline our approaches to primary prevention, welfare and support services and access to justice. 2009 saw the beginning of what is now known as the National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children. The plan recognises that, in particular in a country like Australia, a one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate. An Indigenous woman in Australia living in a remote community experiencing violence is vastly different to a woman with a disability living in Sydney. One size does not fit all. So while states and territories still have the autonomy to pursue their own programs and policy solutions, these policy solutions and programs are now coordinated, they are now regularly reviewed at a national level, and they are supported by overarching national scale initiatives. This policy response is all about connecting with each other, sharing good ideas and taking collective action to fill the gaps. We are now into the second plan of the 4 3-year plans, and I'm pleased to report that we are making some significant gains in this important area. One of the key initiatives of the National Action Plan was the establishment of a telephone hotline. We call it in Australia 1800 RESPECT. It was the first national phone line that is also an online counselling line for those experiencing domestic family violence and sexual assault. We didn't stop there though. The service is also supported by a mobile app called Daisy that people can download onto their mobile phone. What this app does, it connects women across Australia with the support services they need in their home state and their local area, such as legal or emergency housing services. The app launched this year features private web browsing and a quick exit button, and it's already been taken up by thousands of women. Another key area of reform in Australia is in relation to justice and information sharing. We all know that for women to be adequately protected under the law, the police, the courts, child protection and legal services must be talking to one another. They must be on the same page. And yet we face the dilemma in Australia. Each state has its own police force, it has its own court system and it has its own laws. What this has meant from a practical perspective is that someone like Rosie, who got a domestic violence order in her home state, if she fled to another state, that domestic violence order was no longer recognised and she had to go through the whole process again. We're changing that, and by the end of this year, all states and territories in Australia are going to have in place the legal framework to enable the automatic recognition of domestic violence orders. That's a fantastic step forward for Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, though I think perhaps the most significant policy achievement by successive Australian governments has been driving whole of community change in relation to the culture that makes violence occur in the first place. If we're not attacking the culture, we're actually not making that long-term change. So one of the things that we're very much focused on as the Australian government is engaging the community, in particular engaging young people and engaging men, to make them aware of what respectful relationships look like. We have a male-led initiative and it's called the White Ribbon Campaign, and this is now a household name in Australia. In terms of community understanding of domestic violence, again, I'm pleased to report that we have mapped this and we have seen an improvement in the understanding of what domestic and family violence is. Ladies and gentlemen, more than 100 years ago, English writer and activist Frances Cobbe coined the phrase wife torture as part of a campaign to enable abused women to take out restraining orders against their partners. Her argument at the time was that these assaults stemmed from the fact that a man's wife is his property. While of course we have come a long way since that time, there is no doubt that remnants of this outdated philosophy remain, and they're part of an underlying culture of masculinity and ownership, an understanding that the man in the relationship is the one with the control, he is the guardian, he is the breadwinner. These beliefs perpetuate the very same gender inequality that forms the basis for violence against women and their children. And the Australian government is firmly of the belief that unless we are tackling gender inequality as the root cause of violence against women and their children, we will not make long-term change. And that is exactly what our Prime Minister has said. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's one thing that Rosie Batty has taught us in Australia, is that there's no more time for complacency. There is only time for action. We are a nation that I'm so proud to say is built on the values of freedom and of dignity for the individual, of a fair go, of loyalty. And yet I stand here today as a policymaker, and my reality is that in Australia we are still faced with the issue, with the pervasiveness of domestic and family violence. Our own Prime Minister has implored our nation to redouble our efforts and renew our fight. And if there's one thing he has said which has resonated across Australia, it is this. In Australia, we must become both domestically and internationally recognised as a nation that respects its women. And ladies and gentlemen, as a policymaker, that is my real belief that that is exactly what we will do. Thank you.
Michaelia Cash, I'll be handing you this microphone. What a passionate speech. Thank you very much. Thank you. At this point, I would like to ask some of you members to join the conversation here. Please welcome Aldiana Sisic, who is the chief of the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. Welcome, Aldiana. Patricia Vargas, on behalf of the representatives of women's shelters. Pat, please join us on stage. Welcome. And Yulia Jarova, who is a representative from Y, one of the sponsors of this World Conference. Yes, Yulia, please join the panel. And I'd like to ask you to squeeze together on one side of the table.
Squeeze.
Thank you very much. So, just a very quick, no, nobody at the head of the table. I'm sorry about this. It's all about this, the screens. A very, very quick reaction from you to what Michaelia was telling us, please.
Me?
Yes, all three of you, but very quick.
I definitely want to underline the last statement by Minister, because gender equality, inequality is the root of everything. The violence against women is just a reaction or a final, final moment of that taking power away from a woman. So, yes, absolutely.
Julia.
If all governments are speaking like Michelle is speaking, we will not make steps, we will have a leap.
Patricia.
I think on behalf of the Global Network and all the shelter workers here who have known this forever, that women we're losing women, we shouldn't be, we need to protect them. I commend you, and I hope that you take this message to the UN and to all the ministers of status of women, and work with us in collaboration to make it better for every woman in every part of the world.
Wonderful. So, Adriana, as a chief of the UN Trust Fund, can you tell us concisely about this UN Trust Fund?
Sure. The UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women, which is managed by UN Women on behalf of the UN system, is the only fund that is actually multilateral global fund that addresses specifically and only the issue of violence against women and girls. We are actually a fund that is created by governments, by member states. In 1996, as a response to Beijing Platform for Action and a critical area, one of the critical areas, which was violence against women, we were created in order to support with the funds the local and national projects that are dealing with the issue of violence against women and to end them. Since then, we have funded over 400 programs across the globe. Right now, we are funding about 100 projects in 75 countries and territories, and in a value of about $80 million. Every year, we have our global call for proposal, which in some ways is a direct reflection of the dire need in the world. Every year, we receive over 2,000 applications across the globe asking for over $1 billion. To address the issue at the local or national or regional level. Yeah. We have a selection process that actually we have a number of our grantees. I met some of them here too today here. The process takes a bit of time. It takes about 6 to 7 months. And in the end, we award the amount that we do have available that year for the grant giving. Right now, last year we awarded $8 million. For 23 projects. I'm very happy to announce that this year, just last week, we have awarded 33 projects for 14 million, which means we are growing.
Thank you, thank you. So, Patricia, you are one of the board members of GNWS, and you were involved in the first World Conference. Yeah. Can you tell us what has changed, what has become better from then till now? So that's 8 years ago, the first conference.
So one of the first things that has changed, the first time we met in Edmonton, Canada, we didn't have a lot of political people present. Today we have royalty and more political people present. And I think people not just coming to say greetings, but really to make a commitment against violence against women, right? Yes. I think what we also see is that the first conference, we have 51 countries participating. Today, we're more than 100. We speak many different languages, and yet we all know what it is to run a shelter. We all know what it is to live through the lives of women who are escaping violence and living with the children. We know, no matter where you are in the world, how difficult it is to get sustainable funding from governments, how difficult it is to show not just the stories that we heard, but the data and the framework for evaluation, which we don't get funded for, and how we've been trying, and you'll see the data count, we try on the side of our desk to do this kind of work.
So what needs to change to get where you want to be? Is it that we need to change the narrative on how we talk about this subject?
I think we need to acknowledge that shelters and the work that we do in the area of violence against women is imperative. We are the ones who live with women. We're saving lives. Women and all over the world should be able to pick up a phone and get help if they're feeling unsafe about their own safety or that of their children. And so we shouldn't have any turnaways. We should have shelter spaces. We should have places. We have so many expertise in this room alone. We can tell you what women live, how policies impact them, their hopes and dreams. And we know how to navigate the impossible system of the law,
Yes.
of systems of the
Well, there you go.
file.
Yes. Yes.
We are advocates, and we need to be recognized as such. We need to be saying that doing a poster is not enough, and having a campaign is not enough. We are the ones saving lives.
So, hearing from Michaelia, Australia is working on these subjects. So, what can other countries learn from Australia? Because actually, you're on the forefront there, I guess.
We are, and certainly we are very open about the fact that it took us a long time to get to where we are, but we now have a coordinated policy response across the federal, state and territory governments. It's a response that we have worked out together so that everybody in Australia has ownership of the policy response, because I think that is so important. But also, we are more than happy to share what we are doing in Australia with other countries. And certainly that is the benefit of these types of forums, that we can tell people what we're doing, but then obviously if people want to hear more about what we're doing, we are more than happy to assist. We don't say that we've got it right in Australia.
But you're trying.
We are absolutely trying.
Yes.
There is also financial commitment, because I think that is so important. A substantial financial commitment from the federal government and from the state and territory governments, but it's also about the national leadership. It's about the Prime Minister himself, and certainly our former Prime Minister Abbott and Prime Minister Turnbull both saying this is a national priority for our government, because I think everybody would agree leadership begins from the top, and when you have the Prime Minister of your country saying this is an issue we're going to tackle together, the whole of the country comes in behind you.
That's excellent to hear. Thank you. So, Julia, you are involved in the Power of Three. Now, what is the Power of Three?
Well, it's probably surprising that a global company like Ernst & Young EY is here at this conference, and we're sponsoring with heart and pleasure. And this is because women are in our social responsibility program already for more than 15 years. And it is very much driven by the top as well. And our top is a male top, and he is probably the most passionate talking about women. We have realized in all these 15 years that alone you make steps, but you don't make a leap, you don't accelerate. So we have introduced the Power of Three concept, and here I would like to share what it is. We said we are a powerful corporations. We are 190,000 people all over the globe. We are influential, but we can't do it alone. We need the government, we need the NGO and small entrepreneurship. We need the Power of Three. And we don't need them to just give us money here and there and sponsor. We need them to be our anchors. We need them to be committed together to one goal.
And what can you do to make them understand? Because that's what we've been doing. We've been talking about what we need, and we haven't been talking about what we actually demand and what we expect. Maybe we should stop asking and just...
Exactly, and evolving. And if you ask me as an idea, I would say even the global network of women's shelters. No, let us have anchors from the Power of Three. Let them involve them into this discussion on a sustainable platform and not on a sporadic participation. And let's see what we can do together, because we are working for one cause. We're working for a better society, for economic inclusion, for social inclusion, and hence for prosperity. And we've done a study last year, which we have reported at Davos, and we're not going to wait 80 years for parity. We are not waiting. We
There you
have
go.
to
That's
act.
the spirit. That's the spirit. Adriana,
If I may-
shortly, because we're running out of time. Short reaction.
Short, very full.
Yes.
I know you said that one issue in the room is where are the men, but I'm going to put another elephant out of the room and say where is the money. Because we all know that
Well, it's
all
in
the
the men's
great
pockets.
policies,
The money is
all the
always in
great
the men's
research,
pockets.
I think the Sustainable Development Goals have created critical juncture for a change in the issue of violence against women, because once and for all, it's spelled out as a target in the development goals. Now, what we want to see from the UN Trust Fund is where is the money? We want now to see the strong financial commitment from all the member states, from corporations, from individuals to
And
put the money
how are
behind.
you going
And
to
then
make
we
that
do have
known?
best practices.
Yes.
We do have great policies. We go and implement them. Let's roll out our sleeves, roll them up, and go and do the work with the money.
Thank you. Last word from Michaelia, rounding up.
That word for you.
Look, as I said, from the Australian government perspective, I'm also the Minister for Employment, so I do a lot in the leadership space, a lot in the increase in women's workforce participation, etc. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what fantastic policies you have as a government if your number one policy is not keeping women safe. Because every other policy follows on from that fundamental human right that each and every one of us across the globe deserves to be safe at home, safe on the street, and safe online. And that's what we're striving to do in Australia.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. Michaelia Cash, Adriana Sisic, Patricia Vargas, and Julia Jarova. Thank you so very much for being a part of this conference and for your input. Thank you so much. Moving on to the subject of advocacy. Please welcome Yuan Feng. She's advocate for women's rights and gender equality in China. Where are you? There you are. Please welcome. Will you join me in the lounge area, please? There you go. Thank you. So I would like to ask you, you've been active for quite a long time in China. Can you tell us about the changes since you've started this work?
There are many changes. Here I just name three. One is many women connected and act as an NGO. NGO is a concept introduced to China by 1995 World Conference on Women of the UN. So this is number one change. Number two change is now more and more women have the awareness about their rights. So now, for example, if they experience domestic violence, they will call the police. Before, they just keep silent, or at most, they go to government-sponsored women's organization. But now they call the police.
In 20 years' time, that change has come already?
Yes.
So has the overall position of women changed in China, do you think, after 95?
Yes and no. Women's situation changed a lot. For example, now in China, women can enjoy the same opportunity to finish their university education and graduate school, even earn a PhD degree. However, women are as not fortunate as men to get a job, to get the same pay or go to the decision-making position.
That's the same in Europe, that's the same in America,
Yeah.
but you're working on it, I understand. So the attitude of China, I know China is a huge country, I've been there, it's a wonderful country, I must say. But the attitude of Chinese people on the subject of violence against women, can you explain how that is? How do they look upon it?
Oh, that's really changed a lot. When we start to do work on domestic violence, in that time people said, domestic violence? Do you beat your wife? Do you beat your wife? If all of you don't beat your wife, no such.
It doesn't exist.
It does exist in China. But now it become a household term.
I see.
Yeah.
And what happened to make that change?
I think number one is women connected and act. NGO play a leading role to make this term become a household name, and also NGO promote a specific law on domestic violence. After 15 years advocacy, now there is a process. Our lawmakers is going to adopt a specific law on domestic violence this year, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
so. And you've mentioned in articles that the Chinese police are not sufficiently trained or equipped to take action when it comes to violence against women or domestic violence. How is that going now? Is there any progress?
Yeah, there are some progress, especially many NGOs to initiate the capacity building project to train the police officers understand gender-based violence, especially domestic violence.
Yeah.
But however, just you mentioned, China is so big, so huge. So if the government don't take this responsibility, NGOs cannot take care of all the police officers. Even in Beijing, you know, many women try to call police officers, but police officers now, the good sense is they go to the site. But however, they cannot deal with the case properly. So this is our challenge.
This is your challenge for the future, yes. And then last but not least, are there enough safe places in China for women who need them?
There are some good news and some bad news.
Let's start with the bad news and end with the good news.
May I speak good news first?
Yes, of
Okay.
course. I'm not the boss here. Go ahead, yes.
Okay, the good news is last month, September 24th, very critical connections have been established. The Ministry of Civil Affairs jointly issued a guidelines with government-sponsored All China Women's Federation about how the shelter operate.
Yes.
And they required every city have this kind of shelters.
Every city?
Every city.
Yes.
So this is good news.
It is excellent news,
yeah.
yes, it is.
This is the first explicit policy on shelters and rescue work. However,
There's the bad news, yes. There's no money.
Yeah, other types of other survivors of other types of gender-based violence cannot take this advantage of shelters to domestic violence. So these shelters almost just named exclusively to domestic violence victims.
I see.
So women and children of domestic violence survivors can use this, but the other types no.
Right.
Number two is some particular vulnerable groups not mentioned in this policy. For example, disabled women, women who have serious ill and wounded by domestic violence, how to get some financial support and educational support for the children, not mentioned.
So there's still a lot for you to do.
Yeah.
Well, at least you're working very hard on it, and there is good news to be reported. So thank you for that, Yuan Feng. I'd like to ask you to join me on that side, please.
Okay, thank
Come
you.
with me. Thank you, Yuan Feng. And I'd like to ask to join us here on stage Inge Verdaasdonk, who is a representative of the women in the Dutch women's shelters. Inge, please welcome. Please come on stage and be welcome. And join Yuan Feng. Vidar Vettervalk, who's a psychologist and a representative of the Men for Gender Equality and the Men Engage in Sweden. Vidar, welcome. Join us, please. And Fatima Outaleb of the l'Union de l'Action Féminine in Morocco, who will talk with us as well. Fatima, please join us. Thank you. So let me start with Inge. Inge, we've read your story in the newspaper this week, and you'll be speaking tomorrow, I think?
Today.
Today even,
4
yes?
o'clock. Yes.
So the people who don't know, Inge is a survivor of violence herself. Can you respond quickly to what Yuan Feng was telling about the situation in China? Compare it to the Netherlands, if you can.
Well, I think some things might have been a couple of years back for here, but still here when women go to the police, they don't always get the help they were waiting for, that they were expecting. So I think that's similar. We still need to address things to the police in the Netherlands. And also in the Netherlands, there's not a waiting list for shelters because it just doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that there are not women waiting for a place, but there's just no one who is registered.
Who's registered them,
yes.
Right.
So there's not a waiting list, but
Yes.
there are not enough places in the shelters in the Netherlands.
So here in the Netherlands, you've become the voice of the women and in the daily practice and the policy of women's shelters. So how does this, the work that you do now, how does it impact women in your position? Do you get response from them?
Well, I was in, in 3 different shelters in 2007, so it has been a couple of years ago. And in the last years, I kept talking to women who went into shelters, came out of shelters. And a lot of things did change the last years, especially when the improvement plan was going on for almost 5 years. And there was a panel of clients and former clients involved in that panel. And it really made improvements also fitting what clients, what the women wanted in the shelters.
Because nobody had asked them before.
No,
I cannot believe
really.
this, really. Yes.
So that was a big change, and I think that they've learned from it that it's very effective to ask the women what they think they need. It doesn't need a lot of money. We don't ask millions, but we do ask that you listen to us.
Yes. I would say it's a matter of logic, but who am I to say so? Thank you, Inge. So Vidar, you're engaged in one of the sessions this afternoon, I think it is as well, yes? Can you tell us about the cooperation between Sweden and Russia on the issue of men for gender equality? Russia, that must be difficult.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's a wonderful challenge in a way, because what we're doing is that we are cooperating, men and women together, to prevent violence from happening and to provide support and protection and shelter for women when violence happens and for children, and also developing work with treatment for perpetrators, for men not to repeat violence. And the nice thing is that this is a cooperation where Sweden and Russia are learning from each other.
So how did it come about? Who contacted whom?
Yeah, that's a long story.
Well, can you tell us a short version?
Well, we were in Russia for 4 years trying to raise the issue of it's possible to engage men for gender equality. And after 4 years, one man, it's a military man, Alexander Gogolkin, stood up and wanted to work with this. And what we're learning from Russia is that the work with perpetrators treatment is from start developed together with crisis centers and shelters for women. And that's not been the case in Sweden. And another important and beautiful thing that we learned from Russia is that the primary preventive work with fathers participants in fathers' groups are now advocates for a legislation against domestic violence in Russia, which still doesn't exist. And now women's shelters and Center Anna in Moscow, for example, are now running programs with fathers' groups and primary prevention. And that's something we still need to develop in Sweden, that close cooperation.
Okay, but working on it. So now we have a room with 120-something different countries represented here. What is it that you would like everybody to know, something that we really all need to know on this subject?
Well, the Australian minister already said what I wanted to say, that of course we need to work with the protection and the support to the survivors of violence until the violence ends. And at the same time, we need to work with the cause of the violence and with the men, both in primary prevention, with men and boys and girls and women, and also with the perpetrators. And to do it practically and show that it's possible, and then to influence policy level.
Yes. It should maybe, one thing, I'm just trying to think, it should be maybe part of just rearing children. Do we do enough with our children to teach them what the world is really about and whose role is what? Do you think it's something we should do more?
If you take all the children, yes. Not just girls.
No,
now
I'm talking all
we do
children.
a lot
Yes.
to the girls, and it's not a girls' issue.
That's what I was saying.
So
Yes.
I really think if we could teach our children, but be the good examples to our children, we have to show them how we think that you should treat men and women. And if we set examples that are unequal,
Yeah.
that's what we teach them.
That's what we teach them, yes. So Fatima, you're from Morocco, de l'Union de l'Action Féminine. What are your successes in your work? You work with empowering women, I understand. So what is your big success so far?
I think first I'm part of a global, let's say, group, Morocco-based. The first thing we managed to do was to open the first illegal women's shelter in Morocco in 2002.
The first illegal one?
Illegal, yes, it's illegal.
Rebel advocacy, I like, yes.
And the second, I think, achievement or challenge was to ban that article of the Penal Code, which criminalizes any act of protecting or dealing or hiding a married woman. And we managed to do that, and it was a
wonderful
great thing.
Congratulations.
Actually, it was not easy. I appreciate the applaud, but I'm saying that it was not an easy matter to do that. I think the last thing I'm proud of was the removal of, let's say, we brought justice to women victims of rape by banning a law which was rewarding the rapist and which was allowing the rapist to avoid jail by marrying the victim. And we managed to do that last year.
So tell me, because this, what I personally want to do during this conference is to see where everybody has strengths and weaknesses and where we can learn from each other. So that's the question I'm asking you. Your peers in other countries, what can they learn from you? What can you learn from them?
I don't think they can learn much from me.
Oh, yes,
they can
could.
learn from themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have different contexts, different environments, but we really, and I think that we share something. Courage first, work collaboratively, engage in men, and never forget the survivors. Empower the survivors, advocate with them, and never for them on our own. We need them on board to strategize, to make any plan of action that concerns them. And never boast and say, we did this and we can do that. We are not super women. We are just human beings. We need each one of us to work together and reflect on the best ways to end violence against women.
Thank you. Yuan Feng, so you've heard the other three voices now. Is there something that you can take home to China that you've heard here today that you could implement there?
Yes, I share the similar feeling. I think just like the slogan of this conference, connect and act. This is also just the exact word I think we share this experience. Together, connect and act, we can expand women's strengths. We can amplify women's voices. We can leverage the institutional change we demand. So then we can achieve a world free of the violence.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. Fatima Outaleb and Vidar Vettervalk, Inge Verdaasdonk and Yuan Feng. Thank you so very much, all of you, for sharing your stories. Boy, this hour really went by fast, didn't it, ladies and gentlemen? I could have talked for hours, but unfortunately, the timetable doesn't allow me to. So let me just share with you a couple of practical things that you might need to know. Of course, you'll be going back to your parallel sessions this afternoon. And the people who are going to watch the films, they will be shown here on this screen. Let me tell you shortly about them. At 2:45, the film Hidden Violence and Then What will be introduced to you by Hamida Lakko, who was born in Pakistan but who has been living in the Netherlands ever since the age of 4. So that film will take an hour, and at 4 o'clock, ranging till 5, the film Singing in the Dark will be in this same area here, introduced to you by Mathieu Goedhart, who is a child and youth psychiatrist. So I wish you the very best for this afternoon's sessions, and those of you watching the films, please stay here, maybe come to the front. And the rest of you, I'll see tomorrow morning. We'll be starting at 9 o'clock sharp. Please don't miss that plenary. Dr. Mukwege from the Democratic Republic of Congo will be with us then, and I'm sure you don't want to miss that. Thank you, Your Royal Highness, for being with us. We'll see you tomorrow. Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody.